Hi again. In The Rise of Adventism, Edwin Scott Gaustad, editor, Jonathan Butler, in the last chapter of the book, Adventism and the American Experience, he's been dealing with the mark of the beast, as Ellen G. White saw it, this America standing for the Lord's Day, Sunday, whereas she said that the Revelation clearly laid out that the mark of the beast was somehow associated with changing times and seasons and making the 8th day, or the first day of the week, the sacred day instead of the Sabbath. And of course they still believe that to this day, as far as I can tell. The loyal Adventists still believe what Ellen G. White's interpretation of Revelation revealed. But they were forced, the Adventists were, in that generation when she was still alive, to make their uneasy peace with America, which they had said was fulfilling the beastly prediction of Revelation 13, maybe the second beast more than the first. The second beast being the one with the two horns, looking like a lamb, but speaking like a dragon. So here in this era, between 1844 and 1900, they have to make an uneasy peace with America and indeed with history, because their predictions about the date obviously were the date the parousia was being delayed. So Jonathan Butler in this last chapter deals with how they deal with the fact that the Lord's coming was a lot longer in happening than they had hoped. Seventh-day Adventist apocalypticism had been cast into the mold of a new and complicated era. In the process, the apocalypticism itself had yielded some to a traditional between-the-times eschatology. For Adventists of the post-war, that is, the post-Civil War generation, there was time to preach their message, more time than Millerites had imagined, as the dragon slumbered inside the American beast. If Uriah Smith had been subservient to a prophetic determinism in pre-Civil War Adventism, Ellen White proposed a prophetic Arminianism that made Adventists responsible, to a degree, for the shape of eschatological events. Adventists were not to wait for the Lord, an idle expectancy, but in earnest work. They were not to wait for the Lord in idle expectancy, that's her phrase, but in earnest work, end of quote. Entirely contrary to the early Uriah Smith, Ellen White believed that Adventists could hasten or retard the end. To speak irresponsibly and critically of government would precipitate the time of trouble prematurely. To labor on behalf of civil and religious freedom in America would provide an extension of precious time in which to work. The two vital examples of such labor in this period were backing prohibition and opposing Sunday legislation. Encouraging Adventists toward the ballot box, petitions, temperance rallies, and, on occasion, public office, Mrs. White typified the political prophetic that brought Seventh-day Adventism within the borders of the political process. The Adventists, as a prophetic people, were to use their voice to sustain the Republic as long as possible. The irony of their position, of course, involved them in a particular vocational hazard. They wished to delay the end in order to preach that the end was soon. Seventh-day Adventist participation in politics would remain highly discriminatory. Adventists were apolitical on most issues, fitting the general stereotype of premillennialists. The usual politicking was an unsavory business for Ellen White, as for many in this era of political backwardness and corruption. The church was to preach God's message, not taint itself with the machinations of party politics. Yet various political issues, if not party politicking as such, impinged upon the preaching of God's message. Split-ticket voting was often necessary, as Sabbatarians and Prohibitionists formed a voting bloc, and Adventists at times were compelled to support liquor interests by opposing Sunday legislation. The political issues relevant to the Adventist message could range far in the mind of the prophetess. In discouraging Nebraska Adventists from an interest in populism, betraying a bout with political sectionalism among the believers, she referred to the controversy over the monetary standard as one of Satan's masterpieces. She wrote, "This is not the devising of God, the changing of the circulating currency, What will it affect? It will cause a state of things that will bring oppression to the poor and create distress. It is one of the devil's schemes, and I thought those who believed the truth would not be deceived in the least degree upon this matter." End of quote. Not fitting comfortably the apolitical posture, Mrs. White had addressed the students at Battle Creek College in 1883, and here's a direct quote. "Dear youth, what is the aim and purpose of your life? Are you ambitious for education, that you may have a name and position in the world? Have you thoughts that you dare not express, that you may one day stand upon the summit of intellectual greatness, that you may sit in deliberative and legislative councils and help to enact laws for the nation? There is nothing wrong with these aspirations. You may, every one of you, make your mark. You should be content with no mean attainments. Aim high and spare no pains to reach the standard." End of quote. Seventh-day Adventists had made the trek of disinheritance from western New York to southern Michigan, but now they were making the return journey. The socio-economic factor of Yankee thrift, industry, education, and budding professionalism doubtless contributed to their return eastward in order to claim a larger share in the American inheritance. By 1905, the General Conference headquarters and the Review and Herald Publishing Association were located in Washington, D.C., and J.S. Washburn, a financial secretary, suggested this was part of a grand new design for the denomination. Washburn remembered Ellen White's comparison of Jerusalem to Washington, D.C., and her insistence toward century's end to re-enter eastern centers of influence. America was, quote, "the last great nation on earth," reiterated Washburn. How appropriate it was for Adventists to proclaim the last message at the center of this last great nation. Indeed, it was necessary. Washburn contemplated the scene from his Review and Herald office window at a North Capitol Street address. In one direction, he could see the magnificent Capitol building and the bold Statue of Freedom, representing the very best in American republicanism. But across from the Capitol and library, in the same field of vision, was the International Reform Bureau, organized under the leadership of W.F. Crafts to lobby for Sunday legislation, and thus, in an Adventist view, to destroy American liberty. The Seventh-day Adventist mission now included sustaining the American Republic against the subversiveness of Sunday legislation, and an Adventist presence in Washington, D.C. afforded such an opportunity. Washburn noted as well that the Review and Herald offices occupied the Washington House, which he understood to have been the residence of the father of American republicanism, and now symbolically identified Seventh-day Adventism with the national interest. In 1863, the National Reform Association had been established on the premise that the Civil War tragedy could have been averted by a Christian America, or an America of true Sabbatarians. By the 1870s, the association claimed the membership of a number of Middle Western state governors. It was in the South that Sunday laws were enforced on an explicitly religious basis. In the 1860s, Seventh-day Adventists were convicted in Arkansas and Tennessee on Sunday violations, and a General Conference Committee on Sunday arrests advised against paying the fines in order to call public attention to the injustices. In 1884, Adventists began publishing the Sabbath Sentinel, soon re-entitled the American Sentinel, and directed toward a non-Adventist public to awaken national concern for problems of civil and religious liberty. In 1888, the year Ellen White's The Great Controversy was published, Senator H.W. Blair submitted his Sunday arrest bill to the 50th Congress and saw it defeated by a lobby that included Seventh-day Adventists. Blair resubmitted the bill to the 51st Congress with an exemption for the Seventh-day Adventists, but again the Adventists helped defeat the bill. In July 1889, the National Religious Liberty Association was organized by Seventh-day Adventists, resolved to preserve the American Constitution against changes threatened by the National Reform Association, and pledged to oppose all religious legislation before Congress and protect the rights of persecuted people of any race, color, or creed. In 1892, the association was embroiled in the celebrated debate over Sunday closing of the World Exposition in Chicago. Crusading for religious tolerance, Seventh-day Adventists petitioned both houses of Congress, read position papers before congressional committees, and presented legal briefs in the courts as they had never done before. Also, in 1892, the Supreme Court handed down its Christian Nation decision. Prior to this, Adventists had spent thousands in legal defense fees, usually without success. About 50 Adventists had been convicted at that point for Sabbath violations and 30 sent to prison. After 1892, Adventists considered the cost of lawyers a wasted expenditure and spoke in their own defense as well as they could. The real confrontation between Adventists and evangelicals on the Sabbatarian issue involved the political question of just how to protect the American Republic, with a national Sabbath or without it. We'll put in a link to a similar, or I would say a parallel situation that James Penton talks about. Just as the Adventists here were in trouble, because they certainly didn't expect to have to wade through the world of politics in late 19th century America, because they thought the second coming would have happened before that. Just as that was the milieu in which the Adventists found themselves in the last couple of generations of the 19th century, so James Penton lays out how Jehovah's Witnesses found themselves in a new world they weren't expecting after the 1975 fiasco. So I'll put that link on your screen.